The former apprentice of the famed Jedi Swordmaster Dooku, Qui-Gon Jinn was a revered and powerful member of the Order, but also an unconventional maverick, frequently butting heads with the Jedi Council. Many noted that he no doubt would have been made a member of the body if not for his stubborn adherence to his own personal philosophy, itself the result of his strong attunement to the living Force. A great swordmaster and teacher, Jinn successfully trained 2 Padawans as Jedi Knights, though his second pupil, Xanatos, fell to the dark side and became one of his long-standing enemies. Notably, Jinn participated in such conflicts as the Stark Hyperspace War and actions against the terrorist organization Nebula Front. However, the most notable of these was the invasion of Naboo. While rescuing the Naboo Queen Amidala from captivity at the hands of the occupying Trade Federation, he and her entourage were forced to stop off at Tatooine. Here, Qui-Gon encountered the young Anakin Skywalker, a local slave boy who displayed latent signs of Force sensitivity. Discovering the extent of the child's untapped potential, Jinn became convinced that he was the chosen one of prophecy, destined to bring balance to the Force. Using every tool at his disposal, Jinn masterminded Skywalker's release from servitude and spirited him away to the Jedi Temple for evaluation, though not before being attacked by the Sith apprentice Darth Maul, whom he narrowly escaped. Frustrated by the Jedi Council's refusal to accept Skywalker for training, citing his age, Jinn was sent to accompany Queen Amidala back to Naboo, ostensibly to act as her bodyguard, but in truth to attempt to apprehend Darth Maul should he show himself again. Maul did not disappoint, and Jinn, aided by his latest student Obi-Wan Kenobi, engaged the Sith Lord. After a lengthy duel through the Naboo plasma refinery, Jinn was separated from Kenobi and overwhelmed by Maul's powerful offensive. Kenobi narrowly bested the Sith warrior on his own, though too late to save Jinn's life. With his last breath, Jinn made Kenobi promise to train Anakin Skywalker as his own student. Transcending the material plane as a Force spirit, Qui-Gon Jinn returned to aid his surviving friends and colleagues in their time of crisis, the Great Jedi Purge.
A hardy Keldor descended from a long line of Jedi Knights, including an uncle and a niece. Plo Koon was an eminent council master during the waning days of the Republic. Koon's grim and imposing appearance belied a kind and compassionate nature which garnered him the respect of not only his fellow Jedi, but also the servicemen he commanded and inspired through his example during his time as a military leader. Considered to be polite and humble almost to a fault, Plo Koon was the final Padawan of a powerful Jedi Master, the aged Wookiee Tyvalka, with whom he remained close. While his sarcastic wit and tendency to act rashly in his early years often tested his master's patience, Koon successfully passed his trials and descended to the rank of Jedi Knight at an unspecified point. Nevertheless, he formed close friendships with much younger knights and initiates. Incidentally, one of Plo Koon's greatest friends was the maverick Qui-Gon Jinn, whom Plo Koon once wished to abdicate his prospective seat on the Council to. Due to his instrumental involvement with the Stark Hyperspace War, Plo Koon was nominated to replace Tyvalka on the Jedi Council, a position he accepted in honor of his fallen master's last wishes. Following the outbreak of the Clone Wars on Geonosis, Plo Koon served as a distinguished strategist and tactician amongst the Jedi Order, who engaged in such conflicts as the Battle of Brental IV, Korm, and many more. Eventually, Plo Koon was betrayed by his squadron of clone troops and shot down over Cato Nimordia in accordance with the execution of Order 66. Though the reasons for his execution, along with those of many other victims of the Purge, would be falsified in official Imperial reports, Plo Koon's surviving Jedi comrades and political allies would know the truth of his sacrifice.
Hello, YouTube! Welcome to the epic collaboration between Jensaarai and Matt Chapman. We've been working on this for a while, and we're really looking forward to hearing your response. And before you start slamming me for using Qui-gon Jinn again, this matchup was Matt's idea, and I simply jumped on board. Now that all of that is out of the way, please enjoy Qui-gon Jinn versus Plo Koon. A prodigy with the lightsaber from a very young age, Qui-gon Jinn was regarded by his 400-year-old lightsaber instructor as his finest student, and hailed as one of the most able swordsmen in the Jedi Order. Jinn's technique was extremely sophisticated, featuring an elaborate and varied moveset, developed and refined through decades of experience. His skills and expertise were such that even the acclaimed combat instructor, Anun Bandara, labeled him the superior duelist. Qui-gon Jinn's chosen martial arts discipline was Ataru, the fourth form of classical Jedi lightsaber combat. Created to answer the deficiencies of Surisu, the defense-oriented third form, Ataru was an extremely aggressive fighting style based around flamboyant, elaborate swordplay and a heavy reliance on force-assisted acrobatics. While a solid general-purpose offensive fighting style, incorporating training in both dual-blade fencing and unarmed combat, Form 4 was also noted to be an exhaustive practice best employed in short bursts. It is my belief that Ataru was intended to act as a supplement for Surisu, the idea being that a duelist would rely on the passive and efficient Surisu for self-defense, allowing them to conserve their energy in preparation for a counter-offensive with Ataru. However, the majority of Jedi who studied Form 4 often specialized in it and it alone, and Jinn was no exception to this, though it should be noted that his application of Ataru was very out of step with traditional methods. While it has never been explicitly established in any source, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that Jinn completely retooled the Ataru style, developing his own unique method. Ataru is known to lack strength and force in its blows, yet almost every source that has described Jinn's fighting style has made special note of his strength rather than his agility. This is corroborated by the depiction of Jinn's style in The Phantom Menace film. Compared to the much more energetic Obi-Wan Kenobi and Darth Maul, Qui-Gon was very conservative and strength-oriented in his moveset. The reasoning behind this redesign of Ataru is obvious. The novelization of The Phantom Menace notes that Jinn is well past his physical prime, and Form 4 is noted as a physically demanding practice, so it follows that he would scale back the more exhaustive and flamboyant elements in order to better accommodate his physical needs, as well as shifting his focus over to strength in order to better take advantage of his well-developed physique and muscle mass. Accordingly, brute strength was a major element in his personal style and technique. However, he was still a fast-paced and agile duelist with a lot of skill as an acrobat. He simply demonstrated these attributes to a lesser degree than was common for Form 4 stylists. A further result of his retooling of Ataru was the improved sustainability of his style. Traditional Form 4 is described as an exhaustive practice best employed in short bursts, yet Qui-Gon was able to hold up a high-energy lightsaber duel with the much fitter Darth Maul for up to 15 minutes. In addition to better accommodating his own physical needs and shortcomings, Jinn's revamping of Ataru also compensated for many of the weaknesses traditionally associated with the form. He was highly skilled at blast deflection, even employing aimed deflections to take out enemies or other targets of opportunity, though a skilled marksman can get past his guard. His effectiveness against multiple opponents, while a mixed bag, was still an improvement on the typical performance of Form 4 specialists. As shown in a sparring match with his then Padawan Xanatos and a former pupil, Femur, Qui-Gon was able to hold them off with ease when they attacked him individually, but as soon as they came on as a team, he was quickly disarmed. So in other words, Jinn was highly effective against disorganized gaggles of enemies, but was completely useless against properly organized opposition. Jinn strongly favored chaining punches, kicks, and other physical strikes into his lightsaber sequences, very much in keeping with Ataru's focus on using the entire body as a weapon, and implying skill in unarmed combat. He also had some skill at chaining force-based attacks into his lightsaber moves, though not without considerable difficulty, and he often needed to lower his guard while concentrating. More than once, he has simply put away his lightsaber before attempting such attacks. However, one of the most notable attributes of Qui-Gon Jinn was his tactical outlook. As a fighter, Qui-Gon Jinn was much more rooted in the mundane. While he relies on the Force to guide his blade, he doesn't use it to fuel and drive him, instead relying on his native physical capabilities. Rather than rely on a tactical long view, Qui-Gon instead favored a more intuitive mindset, following his instincts and allowing the Force to guide him and direct his actions, almost nudging him along, while he simply responded to the events of battle as they came, rather than trying to anticipate and preempt the actions of the enemy. In a purely philosophical sense, a very serene and enlightened approach. Relying on improvisation rather than planning, Jinn tailored his tactical responses to suit the situation at hand. During the aforementioned sparring match with Xanatos and Femur, Jinn employed a clever defensive tactic where he shunted aside, disabled, or otherwise outmaneuvered each combatant as they came, so that he could engage them one at a time rather than both at once. As described in the Revenge of the Sith novelization, Dooku employed a very similar tactic during his duel with Kenobi and Skywalker on board the Invisible Hand. During a later duel with Xanatos, after the latter's fall to the dark side, Jinn exploited his knowledge of Xanatos' style and psychology by manipulating and goading him, allowing Jinn to gain the momentary advantage. While this demonstration was only enabled by Jinn's intimate familiarity with his former pupil, it remains a notable example of his skill with psychological warfare tactics, and is clearly another mark of Dooku's training, as the Count relied quite heavily on such emotional manipulation to dominate battles. However, while this focus on the needs of the moment over a tactical long view has served Qui-Gon well in many situations, it has also been a major weakness in others, and he has gotten in over his head more than once due to his lack of tactical foresight, the best example being the Duel of Fates. As noted in the Episode 1 novelization, Jinn was well aware that Maul was in complete control of the fight, guiding it to a location of his own choice. Yet he continued to chase after him, unwilling to let him go and confident that he and Kenobi together could bring him down. His lack of foresight proved to be his downfall, as rushing after Maul without thinking allowed his adversary to separate him from Kenobi so he could target Qui-Gon individually and overwhelm him. While Jinn has been observed relying on positional, home field advantages and incorporating psychological warfare tactics into his offensives, at the end of the day, his typical method of attack was little more than a straightforward attempt to power through his adversary's defenses. As a committed offensive duelist, the combination of his sophisticated technique and his still formidable physical attributes made this offensive tactic quite potent, but he ultimately lacked variation. Fortunately, Qui-Gon's commitment to offense didn't prevent him from occupying a more passive role in combat, and it was here that his tactical insight and skill at improvisation truly came to the fore. I've already detailed the defensive tactic he employed against Xanatos and Femur, indicating that when operating defensively, he prefers to avoid direct confrontation, outmaneuvering or shunting aside adversaries. However, when incapable of accomplishing this, he does what he can to eke out a defense, all the while working hard to fight back. That being said, he was able to hold off Darth Maul's committed and highly focused Juya-style offense for quite a substantial period of time, indicating that he can defend himself against anything less than that caliber of attack. At the end of the day, Qui-Gon Jinn was an extremely capable duelist, combining advanced skill and decades of refinement with adaptability and experience. Completely committing to his offense, he was able to outright overwhelm most targets, hammering them until they dropped. Those he can't overwhelm, he manipulates or outmaneuvers. However, when he can't effectively subdue or evade a target, all he can do is delay the inevitable. But while his lack of foresight and straightforward tendencies were major weaknesses, his intuitive genius, his adaptability, and his absolute commitment to the needs of the moment were his greatest strengths. His deviations from the norm did leave him hampered in some ways, but it gave him other, unique advantages, and he was ultimately a credit to both his teachers and his order.
Plo Koon was amongst the most powerful Jedi of his day and was considered to be an elite swordsman within the Order until his death. Although the two never engaged in combat, Maul would have considered the chance to duel the likes of Plo Koon to be a true test of his abilities. Darth Maul never got the chance to put his skills to the test against Plo Koon. However, the Jedi Master would eventually face off against the Sith assassin's brother, Savage Opress. While Plo Koon would have been killed during that conflict if not for the timely intervention of his allies, it should be noted that he matched Opress blow for blow, even landing a strike of his own with his lightsaber. In the end, the Jedi was only brought to his knees when his breath mask was forcibly removed from his face, a clear act of desperation on the part of his simple-minded opponent. Notably, Plo Koon also bested the infamous Jedi killer Asajj Ventress in a lightsaber duel on Qorm, a feat made all the more impressive due to the fact that the Jedi Master was suffering from a broken arm at the time. Considering that Ventress had somewhere in the neighborhood of 24 Jedi combat kills under her belt, and the fact that she had successfully engaged other Council Masters throughout the war, including the esteemed Kit Fisto, Plo Koon's accomplishment here was no mean feat. He was able to combat her no matter how drastically she altered her style or tactics. He matched her strength-oriented saber-staff onslaught with obvious ease. In addition, after giving relatively little ground, he also met her dual-blade Jar-Kai approach, almost literally with one hand tied behind his back, though with notable difficulty. Deftly incorporating telekinetic strikes into his blade work, Plo Koon managed to ward off Ventress's assault and even managed to disarm her by ridding her of one of her twin blades before countering and parrying her attack with his own staunch one-armed defense, all the while multitasking. He was able to split his focus between Ventress's assault and the true matter at hand, preventing Asajj from being able to reinforce her own troops, thwarting her attempted sabotage, and fortifying his own position while injured. A Jedi Master noted for his considerable physical strength, Plo Koon chose to specialize with the fifth form of lightsaber combat. While it is my personal belief that Plo Koon mastered Form 5 in its entirety, Xi-En remains the only variant that he has been officially credited with, specifically within the Clone Wars campaign guide. The Force Unleashed novelization also confirms his renowned Form 5 mastery, but it also fails to specify which variant, so unfortunately, all I can do is defer to the guide as a reference. Though I would still assert my belief that he was well versed in both applications of the style due to his expertise with blast deflection and prowess in lightsaber duels. However, this is no more than conjecture. In any case, given the relative lack of experience Plo Koon appears to have against other lightsaber wielders, it seems clear that Xi-En would no doubt be the variant he has the most familiarity with. Now, this lack of experience against such opponents isn't really a negative commentary on his ability. One doesn't need to be the most battle-hardened in order to be the most viable in a contest. The truth is, Plo Koon simply didn't have much occasion to meet Dark Jedi or Sith in battle, and the result is that most of the information we have on him pertains to large-scale battles and skirmishes of the sort that occur on the front lines of war. Situations like these are, of course, exactly what Xi-En was optimized for. Developed by Masters of Form 3 who felt that the purely defensive style was too limiting, Xi-En was the classical variant of Form 5. The style is characterized by the emphasis it places on intercepting an opponent's blaster bolt, but rather than deflecting it harmlessly to the side, a Xi-En stylist will purposely redirect the bolt back at the caster. The Gemso operates along similar lines, though it was engineered to address lightsaber dueling specifically. Therefore, it places a heavy focus on deflecting or redirecting an opponent's lightsaber blows before countering with an additional powerful offensive, hence the style's moniker, the Perseverance form. While the benefits of such a powerful form, which places a focus on strength and lightsaber attack moves, are somewhat obvious, detractors of the art will typically level two distinct criticisms against the form, the first of which being concern for its domineering and aggressive approach. But that's a matter for the philosophers to pontificate about. The second criticism is more practical. Form 5 stylists are often noted for the weakness of limited mobility the style offers relative to the other forms the Jedi study. However, while this can indeed be a definite drawback under certain conditions, it is also a feature that came about by design. If one attempts to trace the development of lightsaber combat, it becomes clear that each form was brought about as a response to innovations made both within the Jedi Order and without. Shicho addresses the basics. It is essential for teaching initiates the fundamentals of how to allow the Force to guide one's weapon in the midst of combat, providing a basic familiarity with the chosen weapon of the Jedi Order. Makashi addresses energy conservation and traditional blade-on-blade sparring. Form 2 is perfect for refining one's skills with the chosen weapon of the Jedi Order. Makashi also prepares one for engaging those enemies who splinter from the Order only to strike back again and again. Surisu allowed for the defense against blaster-wielding opponents only to gain notoriety as an expression of purely defensive non-violent action. And of course, we're all familiar with the benefits of the Ataru style with its focus on dynamic acrobatics and emphasis on using the entire body as a weapon. However, because of the exhaustive and erratic nature of this practice, Ataru offensives can typically only be maintained within the short term. Form 5, on the other hand, sacrifices such mobility in order to retain one's long-term offensive viability, and this is what allowed Plo Koon to thrive in such chaotic environments. He doesn't move much because he doesn't need to. He can embody the calm eye of the storm while remaining on the offensive, something traditional Form 3 masters would find most difficult. In addition to Shien, Plo Koon also possessed some skill with Ataru as well, though he did not often employ it. However, this should not be dismissed on that basis alone, since it points to a strong knowledge base. In addition to providing him with competency with unarmed hand-to-hand combat, his familiarity with Ataru does not simply provide him with more options in combat, but better enables him to defend himself from others. Simply put, while he may not choose to employ such elaborate tactics in battle, he can defend against an opponent who is using them. Plo Koon managed to withstand Ventress's own expert application of martial arts, but was either incapable of answering with his own, or simply chose not to. This was almost certainly a result of his being injured at the time. Plo Koon, along with Masters Saisi Tin and Deepa Bilaba, is known to have engaged in a martial arts display with Master Yoda in order to demonstrate the precept that knowledge of the Force is superior to physical technique. And it is this sentiment that appears to be the underlying facet of Plo Koon's overall approach. He supplements his considerable physical strength through a consummate and subtle usage of telekinesis, which he uses not to dominate the fight, but to bear through it. Plo Koon operates best while working in concert with others on a chaotic battleground, freely applying his tactical mind and willingness to persevere through the idea that the best defense is a good offense. He's no whirling dervish of unparalleled skill, but he can typically withstand all but the most barbaric or extreme measures, and this is due to his incorporation of Shien and Ataru tactics into his training. While the sixth form of lightsaber combat, Naman, is the jack-of-all-trades fighting style, incorporating elements of all the previous forms and emphasizing the usage of force powers in combat, Plo Koon's dual specialization and natural talent with telekinesis affords him a similar functionality. This simple combination of such inverse forms gave Koon a broad scope and focus around which to build up an array of skills. Those he cannot outmaneuver, he can typically overpower. Those he cannot overpower, he can typically withstand. And still others he can outsmart or outmatch through chaining his force talents into his technique. He's an expert at taking full advantage of the benefits imparted by the styles he's specialized with, while limiting the impact of those same styles' detriments. He's turned Shien's lack of mobility into an asset, relying on his endurance and strength to carry him through. He's overcome Ataru's strain on stamina by limiting its use and placing a heavier focus on timing and precision. As he does with his force powers, he uses his skills with martial arts in moderation, and while he may not be the absolute master of any given style, the end result is that when we view his overall technique as a whole, we can see that it has been forged into something greater than the sum of its parts. Clearly, Plo Koon's reputation as a great warrior is very well deserved.
Qui-Gon Jinn's battlefield conduct may be painfully straightforward, but he is ranked among the preeminent swordsmen of the period and boasts a highly sophisticated fighting technique, so it is entirely possible that his skills are sufficient to overcome Plo Koon. However, neither of us believe that this is the most likely outcome, not because we consider Koon the superior duelist, but because we think he has all the tools he needs to effectively counter everything Qui-Gon Jinn is bringing to the table. On the one hand, Qui-Gon is a much more well-rounded martial artist, balancing out between speed and strength, and effectively using his entire body as a weapon, whereas Plo Koon is a pure swordsman and a dedicated power duelist. But Plo Koon compensates for what he lacks in speed with well-developed precision and timing, while his physical hardiness marginalizes the effectiveness of Jinn's punches and grapples. Moreover, Koon's lightsaber technique is only one component in a broader fighting method that incorporates every single tool at Koon's disposal. While Qui-Gon's personal fighting style is more sustainable than traditional Ataru, it is still demanding and exhaustive, and he can't keep going forever. The simple fact of the matter is that Plo Koon can defend himself against Qui-Gon Jinn's offense, but Jinn can't hold out against Koon. Plo Koon gets the edge as a martial artist and lightsaber duelist. A powerfully built human male in his late 50s, Qui-Gon Jinn was well served by his species' natural adaptability and resiliency, which allowed the human race to become the most populous and widespread in the galaxy. However, while he retained a good level of speed and agility, he was hit hard by the degradation of these attributes as he aged, forced to adjust his lightsaber technique to compensate, relying more and more heavily on his strength and muscle mass. He himself noted that his primary edge was his extensive combat experience rather than overwhelming physical ability. That being said, he was still capable of keeping pace with the much younger and fitter Darth Maul for up to 15 minutes, indicating that even in his diminished state, Qui-Gon Jinn remained a force to be reckoned with.
A physically strong and commanding presence on the battlefield, Plo Koon's striking features made him something of an enigma even amongst his allies. A native of his ancestral homeworld, Doran, Plo Koon was a Keldor of indeterminate age, and while his physiology and equipment provided certain benefits, he was also encumbered with a number of disadvantages as well. Keldor are noted for possessing quicker reflexes and weaker constitutions than their human counterparts. However, their physiology appears to have afforded them greater amounts of protection with which to survive the severe weather of their homeworld. Plo Koon, for example, has even shown himself to be capable of briefly surviving the vacuum of space. Force-sensitive members of the Keldor species were also known to communicate amongst themselves using a form of telepathy, an ability which was augmented by Plo Koon's extrasensory organs. Like all Keldor, Plo Koon requires the use of a breath mask in order to survive in oxygen-rich atmospheres, and without his goggles he would effectively be blind when operating outside of his native habitat or his private chamber within the Jedi Temple. Although this equipment has only been targeted by opponents rarely, it is an obvious point of vulnerability. As I mentioned earlier, there is some contention as to the Jedi Master's actual age. Plo Koon once claimed to be 382 Keldor years old in the year 22 BBY, and while it's also true that a conversion to Galactic Standard years would make Plo Koon roughly 425 years old, I am personally disinclined to accept this. Keldor were similar to humans in that they were considered to be venerable after reaching the age of 70. While the sustaining power of the Force can indeed extend the natural lifespan of a being strong enough, and especially one of the light side, an increase of 350 years seems more than unlikely. Additionally, Plo Koon was known to be the final Padawan of Tyvalka, and a peer of Qui-gon Jinn's. I find it unlikely that either of these could be the case if Plo Koon was already 4 centuries old by the time of Tyvalka's death. Kit Fisto also noted that Plo Koon appears to be smiling after making the claim about his old age, which leads me to believe that his statement was little more than a joke. The Power of the Jedi sourcebook notes that Plo Koon and Qui-gon Jinn became masters together, as the two were great friends during their time as knights. This would indicate that Koon was at the very least the same approximate age as Qui-gon Jinn, meaning that he was around 70 when he journeyed to Geonosis along with the other Jedi under Mace Windu's command. And so, while Plo Koon is in fact old by the standards of his own species, he's managed to retain an exceptional level of health and fitness, especially considering how long he's spent in what would normally be an inhospitable environment for members of his race. He's also pushed through pain and dealt with injury as though largely unaffected, determined never to fail in his mission. The most notable example of this was again the incident on Korm, where he faced Asajj Ventress after having sustained a broken arm. Overall, Plo Koon is an extremely tough Jedi and possesses a high level of dexterity for a being of his years. Having said that, he does have his limits. As formidable as he is, his anti-oxygen equipment does present a tempting target to his opposition, and this is a weakness that he has allowed to be exploited, however rarely.
Qui-Gon Jinn was noted as one of the greatest Force wielders in his day, possessed of a strong connection to the living Force, which was, among other things, the source from which all practical Force abilities were derived. Even as a Padawan, Jinn was of the opinion that the living Force represented the essence of the Jedi calling, and he ultimately considered himself to be a pure instrument of the Force. Allowing the living Force to direct his actions, he favored following his instincts ahead of planning in all that he did, including in how he applied his Force abilities. Guided by his supreme reverence for the Force, he only employed its power as needed, as directed by his instincts. Like the vast majority of Jedi-trained Force wielders, Jinn was capable of augmenting his physical capabilities with the power of the Force, allowing for the performance of the various feats of superhuman speed, strength, and agility that the Jedi were famed for. However, unlike other noted Ataru specialists such as Yoda or Shaak Ti, Jinn did not take this ability to its absolute nth degree, only employing it as needed, and otherwise relying on his native physical capabilities. His skills with telekinesis were considerable, though his most notable applications of it have been as a utility skill rather than a combative ability, moving heavy objects or manipulating the results of a chance cube toss. That being said, he has employed quite effective telekinetic strikes in combat, employing them freely against soldiers and battle droids. While not depicted in the film, the Phantom Menace novelization even depicts Jinn violently dismantling a battle droid with the Force. However, he has never employed such attacks during serious battles with opposing Force wielders. This reluctance could stem from his apparent need to gather his energies before unleashing telekinetic attacks, leaving himself vulnerable to counterattack. or it may indicate an inability to penetrate the force shields employed by most force wielders in order to guard against such attacks. Where Jinn truly shined was in his application of force-based telepathy and mind tricks. While not combative abilities, they were among his most potent tools for resolving disputes and completing objectives. His aptitude was such that he could telepathically communicate with willing subjects, induce relaxation and sleep, and on one occasion he successfully influenced a Hutt, a race noted for their specific resistance to telepathy and mind tricks. However, Toydarians were beyond his ability to influence. But, at the end of the day, arguably the greatest power Qui-Gon Jinn possessed was the ability to transcend the material plane as a Force spirit, surviving his physical death. While a powerful Force wielder, Qui-Gon Jinn invested most of his time and energy into developing his utility powers rather than his combative ones. As a result, he is neither quick on the draw nor a heavy hitter. He maintains a reasonable level of effectiveness nonetheless, though. His reputation may have been primarily due to his academic and philosophical insights into the Force, but he was ultimately a major force to be reckoned with. Pun definitely intended.
As a lifetime member of the Jedi Council, Plo Koon was remarkably strong in the Force. His tendency to see issues of morality in terms of black and white was somewhat at odds with his reputation for not only showing an ability to use a wide array of Force powers, but also a willingness to. Considered along with the likes of Count Dooku to be a telekinetic savant, Plo Koon often incorporated Force pushes and shoves into his fighting technique, and did so seamlessly. He has also used telekinetic applications of the Force for the purpose of reinforcement. He has used these abilities in concert with his fellow Jedi in order to avert disaster throughout numerous conflicts, including the Stark Hyperspace War. On one occasion, he even succeeded in single-handedly caving in the entrance to a mountain in a solo effort while on the run. While other council members such as Saesee Tiin, Yoda, or Yarael Poof retained great notoriety for their psychic abilities, Plo Koon's mental powers were also highly advanced. Plo Koon's telepathic abilities were augmented by his Keldor physiology, as well as the Force bond he shared with his niece, Sha Koon. During the Stark Hyperspace War, the pair of Keldor Jedi were able to use their telepathy in conjunction with other Jedi Masters to communicate with the High Council from across the galaxy. During the same conflict, Plo Koon easily managed to probe the mind of the pirate, Iako Stark, without his presence being perceived, making him aware of everything his enemy was planning. In addition, he also used his telepathic abilities to assist Aayla Secura in recovering her lost memories following the adventure she participated in with her own master, Quinlan Vos. Plo Koon's dedicated study of the physical sciences also facilitated his ability to alter the environment around him, better enabling him to perform feats such as the freezing of small bodies of water or influencing a dense fog in order to provide cover using the Force. Additionally, Plo Koon also possessed some talent with the power known as Malaysia, of which Oppo Rancisis was a long-term instructor. This ability was used to induce extreme dizziness and nausea within a target, thus incapacitating them without leaving any permanent damage or injury. Arguably, Plo Koon's most infamous power was his usage of Force Lightning, which he learned at the Jedi Temple and later perfected, referring to his variation as Electric Judgment. A practical man, Plo Koon flat out refused to allow his innate talents to go undeveloped. That said, he claimed that he had no special fascination with the power, and merely acted in accordance with the Force when he employed the ability against the criminal Pommel in order to rescue a 5-year-old hostage. While the Council requested Plo Koon to consider whether he was wrong to use the ability, or if he would be tempted to use the power in the future, Koon arrived at the conclusion that it would be irresponsible to ignore the potential for developing a useful combat technique, regardless of the connotation lightning carries as a dark ability. Notably, he did not allow himself to be carried away or swept up by emotion. He did not use the power to kill, but simply incapacitate. While not normally as strong as Sith lightning, electric judgment does have the capacity to kill. Wise and perceptive, subtle and yet powerful, Plo Koon was not afraid to use every weapon in his arsenal, every tool at his disposal in order to accomplish his goal. Neither underdeveloped nor over-specialized, Plo Koon was a powerful Jedi and a master of an extremely broad range of Force abilities, powers, and focuses. As an academic and philosopher, Qui-Gon Jinn's mastery of the Force was almost unparalleled in his day, and throughout his many travels and adventures, he learned a great many skills, languages, and secrets that eluded most of his contemporaries.
However, in terms of raw ability, precious little sets him apart from the rest of the great Jedi of his time.
Beyond his rediscovery of the ability to survive physical death, Jinn possesses only the most standard and common of Jedi abilities.
He may have refined these skills to a high degree, worthy of a Jedi Master, but he is still limited. By contrast, Plo Koon is a much more versatile and inventive Force wielder, having mastered abilities that fall outside of the Jedi Orthodox, and even powers associated with the dark side of the Force itself.
It should be noted that both Jedi's personal interests motivated their study of the Force and refinement of their skills.
And both developed and refined these skills to an equal degree.
Qui-Gon Jinn spent his life as a servant of the living Force, concerned with shaping destiny without actually being able to perceive the possible ramifications of his actions. Plo Koon was a much more practical Jedi, whose skills made him one of the most capable field agents within the Jedi Order. Both were amongst the most powerful Jedi of the age. Neither Jedi's command of the Force dwarfs that of the others, and, in an overall sense, they are very much in the same league.
But in terms of combat effectiveness and ability, Qui-Gon Jinn is the more limited combatant. Ultimately, Plo Koon is not afforded the edge by the magnitude of power at his command, but rather by the broad range of abilities at his disposal, and the options they provide. Like many of the great lightsaber masters throughout galactic history, the mentalities of both Qui-Gon Jinn and Plo Koon were essentially expressions of their chosen forms. However, this manifested itself in different ways, due to the major differences on multiple levels between Ataru and Xi'an. One of the most notable things about Ataru was its apparent lack of a core philosophy. It was purely a tool, and was never elevated to a state of mind as the other forms were. So Jinn's approach to combat was both very utilitarian and influenced by other factors, as opposed to any pre-existing martial philosophy inherent to Form 4. Indicative of just how much Dooku rubbed off on him, Qui-Gon applied Ataru with the mentality of a Form 2 stylist, doing away with the more flamboyant elements of the style in favor of the more focused and efficient methods that a Makashi master would encourage. By contrast, Plo Koon was essentially the embodiment of the Form 5 maxim of peace through superior firepower. He was a practical, pragmatic Jedi who developed his powers with the goal and intent of striking out at evil and injustice, attacking social decay at its root. Koon's ultimate goal was bringing and keeping peace. He simply believed that assertive action was required to accomplish this. While it's true that Plo Koon's dense physical frame would better enable him to shrug off various superficial injuries, he's also encumbered by the anti-ox equipment he is forced to wear. If targeted, the odds could rapidly slip into Qui-Gon Jinn's favor, and since age wouldn't factor into this given how close the two of them are, never mind the sustaining power of the Force, I think it's safe to say that no edge can truly be awarded here. There's nothing to write home about where Qui-Gon Jinn is concerned, while Plo Koon carries one crippling disadvantage which balances out his other attributes. Similarly, beyond various cosmetic features, the differences between their lightsabers are negligible, so no edge will be given for armament. And while Plo Koon was awarded the edge as a lightsaber duelist, the edge was given in a more academic sense. Although Matt and I would place our bets on Plo Koon, what truly determines the winner here will be their respective mastery of the Force.
And it is in this field that Plo Koon truly outshines his competition. At the end of the day, Plo Koon is just as good a swordsman, with far more variety on his side as a Force wielder, and it is this aspect of his training that truly tips the odds in his favor. We proclaim Jedi Master Plo Koon the victor.
Alright, ladies, gentlemen, and psychotic mad scientists tampering with the fabric of nature, please remember that this is just our opinion, so don't get too bent out of shape if Qui-Gon Jinn is your favorite Jedi. We totally agree that Liam Neeson is a badass of epic proportions. If you have any questions or quibbles, feel free to leave a comment below, or perhaps make a video response. Our only request is that you keep things civil. We hope you enjoyed the first collaborative effort of Matt Chapman and Jensaarai, and now that all of this is done, we're signing off.